everyone, welcome back to another journey through history's The Cotton Corners. Tonight we're exploring what it might have been like to live as a practitioner of the old ways in medieval Europe, a life lived in shadows, where your greatest gifts were also your greatest dangers. So go ahead and dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan if you need some background noise, and let's settle in for the night. Don't forget to hit that like button if these historical deep dives help you sleep, and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, let yourself sink into your pillows as we travel back over 6 centuries to a time when the line between healing and heresy was dangerously thin, and you're about to discover just how exhausting it was to live with one foot in the mundane world and another in the realm of ancient knowledge. Childhood and early signs. Birth to age 12. You were born on a bitter February morning in 1347 in a small village whose name won't survive the centuries, because honestly, why would it? Your mother labours for nearly 2 days in the cramped back room of your family's cottage, while the wind howls through the gaps in the timber walls and snow piles against the shuttered windows. Your grandmother mutters what sound like prayers, but aren't quite the right words. Not that anyone's really paying attention to the specifics when there's a baby stubbornly refusing to make its entrance into this thoroughly unforgiving world. The fire in the hearth burns lower with each passing hour, and your father keeps feeding its split logs while casting worried glances toward the room where your mother's laboured breathing mingles with your grandmother's increasingly urgent chants. The moment you finally arrive, squalling and red-faced, like any other peasant baby, a cat that's been missing for 3 days suddenly appears on the windowsill, its fur dusted with snow and its yellow eyes reflecting the firelight in an almost unnatural way. Your grandmother notes this with the kind of meaningful look that means absolutely nothing to everyone else present, though she quietly makes the sign against evil eye while pretending to adjust your swaddling cloths. Your father, being a practical man who fixes cartwheels for a living and has no time for superstitious nonsense, is more concerned with whether you have all your fingers and toes. You do, or perfectly formed and surprisingly strong for such a tiny thing, and whether your mother will survive. She will, though she'll complain about her back for the rest of her life, as is her right after such an ordeal. Grow up in a world where most children don't make it past 5. So the fact that you're thriving is already somewhat noteworthy, though not suspiciously so, because your family feeds you well enough on black bread that's actually softer than most, thin porridge enriched with milk when the goat is producing, and whatever vegetables your mother can coax from the kitchen garden behind the cottage. The garden, despite the poor soil and harsh climate, seems to yield more than it should, though your mother attributes this to back-breaking work and careful tending rather than examining the phenomenon too closely. You're a quiet child, which in medieval times is considered a blessing, since loud children tend to annoy everyone in a one-room cottage where privacy is just a pleasant fantasy, and every sound echoes off the low wooden beams. But you're quiet in a particular way that your grandmother begins to notice, the way she notices everything with those sharp grey eyes that seem to see more than they should. You have a habit of staring at things, really staring, in a manner that makes adults slightly uncomfortable, as if you're seeing layers of reality that escape their notice. When you're 3, you spend an entire afternoon watching a spider spin its web in the corner of the cottage, your small body perfectly still as you observe each delicate thread being placed with mathematical precision. When your mother finally goes to sweep it away with her worn broom, are about mentions this obvious oddity. When you're 5, you correctly predict that the neighbour's cow will give birth to twins, announcing it matter-of-factly while helping your mother hang washing on the line, though you have no logical reason for knowing this and can't explain why you're so certain when asked. Your grandmother, who everyone in the village considers a bit odd anyway. She talks to her chickens and they actually seem to listen, laying eggs with unusual regularity and rarely falling victim to the boxes that plague other coops. Starts taking you on long walks through the forest that borders your village. The forest is dense and old, with paths that seem to shift when you're not paying attention, and trees whose roots have been drinking from the same streams for centuries. She teaches you which berries want to kill you, the bright red ones that look poisonous but aren't, the dark purple ones that are sweet despite their forbidding appearance, and which mushrooms will make you see things that aren't there, and which plants will ease a fever or help a woman through difficult childbirth. This knowledge seems perfectly normal to you, as natural as knowing that fire burns and water flows. After all, why wouldn't plants have purposes? It's only much later that you realize not everyone instinctively knows that willow bark soothes pain, or that certain combinations of herbs can make someone fall into a deep, healing sleep that repairs what medicine cannot touch. By age 7, you can identify dozens of plants by touch alone, even in complete darkness, when the moon is hidden behind clouds and the forest is so black you can't see your own hands. Your small fingers seem to know exactly which leaves to pick, always the ones at the perfect stage of growth, never too young or too old. How much pressure to apply when grinding seeds between stones, and somehow you never accidentally harvest anything poisonous, despite the fact that some beneficial plants grow side by side with their deadly cousins. This is a skill that takes most people years to develop, if they develop it at all, and many die in the learning. Your grandmother watches you work with herbs, sees how you automatically reach for the right combinations, and makes those meaningful faces again, the ones that suggest she knows something important that she's not quite ready to share with a child still young enough to speak without thinking.
The other children in the village find you strange, but not in an actively unpleasant way. More like you're speaking a language they don't quite understand, or like you're listening to music they can't hear. When you blaze together in the muddy spaces between cottages, or during the brief summer evenings when parents allow children to stay out past sunset, you have an uncanny ability to find lost things, hair ribbons that have blown away in the wind, wooden toys that have been dropped in tall grass, even a goat that wandered off for 3 days and somehow ended up in a ravine 2 villages over. You just seem to know where to look, following invisible paths that lead you directly to whatever has gone missing, though you can never explain how you know which direction to walk or when to stop searching. The adults chalk this up to being observant and having sharp eyes, because medieval people are very good at finding rational explanations for things they don't want to think about too hard, especially when those things happen around children who are otherwise perfectly normal. When you're 9, during the long winter months when outdoor work is impossible and families cluster around their fires telling stories to pass the endless dark hours, your grandmother finally sits you down for what she calls the conversation. The cottage is particularly quiet this evening, with your parents visiting a neighbour whose wife has just given birth, and the wind outside creates a natural barrier of sound that ensures old ways, the knowledge that existed long before priests started building stone churches and insisting that all wisdom comes from books written in Latin that common people aren't allowed to read. She explains that some people are born with abilities that others fear, and that you must learn to be very, very careful about when and how you use yours, because fear makes people do terrible things to those they don't understand. She speaks in riddles and metaphors, because even within your own family, certain truths are dangerous to speak aloud, and words have a way of travelling beyond the walls where they're spoken. Your education becomes split between two worlds. During the day, you learn to be a proper peasant girl. You help with cooking, standing on wooden stools to reach the preparation surfaces, stirring pots, and learning to judge when bread is ready by the sound it makes when tapped. You master the art of cleaning without wasting precious water, tending the small animals your family keeps, chickens that seem unusually fond of you, a goat that produces more milk when you're the one doing the milking, and all the countless small tasks that keep a medieval household functioning. You learn to card wool until your fingers ache, spin thread that's remarkably even for someone so young, and do the endless mending that keeps your family's meagre possessions functional for years beyond their expected lifespan. But in the evenings, when your father is tired from his work and your mother is focused on her own tasks, sewing by firelight, planning the next day's meals from whatever remains in storage, your grandmother teaches you the real curriculum, how to read the phases of the moon, and what each one means for planting, healing, and the subtle energies that flow through all living things. You learn how to sense illness in animals before symptoms appear, how to encourage plants to grow stronger, and most importantly, how to keep your mouth shut about all of it. By age 12, as your body begins the awkward transition toward womanhood, and your place in the village starts to shift from child to young woman, you've learned that being different isn't just about having unusual abilities. It's about understanding that survival depends on appearing completely ordinary in a world where extraordinary can quickly become dangerous. You practice looking confused when something magical happens, widening your eyes and shaking your head as if you're just as mystified as everyone else. You learn to attribute your successes to luck rather than knowledge, to shrug and smile when people comment on your unusual talents, and to deflect attention with humble words about divine providence and fortunate coincidences. You become expert at helping people while making it seem like they've helped themselves, guiding them towards solutions without ever appearing to lead. Is exhausting. This constant performance of normalcy, like wearing clothes that don't quite fit and never being able to adjust them. But it's also becoming second nature, as automatic as breathing and just as necessary for staying alive. Adolescence and discovery, age 13 to 18. After years of careful preparation and veiled instruction, you cast your first real spell on a dreary Thursday in October when you're 13 years old, and naturally it's because of something completely mundane. The autumn rain has been falling for 3 days straight, turning the village paths into muddy streams and seeping through the cottage walls despite your father's best efforts to maintain the daub and wattle construction. Your family's only milk cow, a sturdy brown beast named Brunhilde, who's been with your family since before you were born, has developed a persistent cough that threatens to turn into something worse. The sound echoes through the small barn attached to your cottage, a wet, rattling noise that wakes you before dawn and haunts your dreams. Since a dead cow means This is what medieval people might generously call a significant problem. Your grandmother has been watching you work with herbs for months now, her sharp eyes noting how plants seem to respond differently in your hands than they do for other people. When you grind feverfew between your palms, it releases more of its essential oils, filling the air with a scent so strong it makes your eyes water. When you harvest honey from the wild hives in the forest, the bees remain unusually calm, buzzing around your face in lazy circles, rather than attacking like they do with other honey thieves. Your touch seems to coax more potency from roots and leaves, and mixtures you prepare somehow maintain their effectiveness longer than identical preparations made by others. She's been waiting for the right moment to push your education into more advanced territory, and apparently a sick cow constitutes the perfect teaching opportunity, because nothing says magical education like barnyard emergencies and the very real threat of winter starvation. She takes you out to the forest on the new moon, when the darkness is complete and the world feels hushed and expectant, as if the very air is holding its breath. The familiar paths look different at night, shadows creating depths that don't exist in daylight, and sounds carry differently, every snapping twig or rustling leaf seeming both closer and farther away than it should. For the first time, she shows you how to do more than just mix herbs, how to pour intention into your work like adding another ingredient, how to speak to the essence of things rather than just their physical properties, how to align your own energy with the natural forces that govern growth, healing, and transformation. You learn that magic isn't about dramatic gestures or mysterious words, though those can help with focus, like closing your eyes helps with concentration, but about understanding the connections between all living things and gently encouraging them toward the outcomes you need. Your first spell is simple, a healing draft for the cow, but one enhanced with intention and timing rather than just herbal knowledge. You gather the ingredients under specific stellar conditions when certain planets align, and the moon's absence creates space for earthbound energy to flow more freely. You prepare them while focusing on the desired outcome, visualizing Brunhilde's lungs clearing and her strength returning, and add what your grandmother calls the breath of life, your own energy woven into the mixture like an invisible thread binding everything together. The process takes hours, much longer than simply mixing herbs, because you must maintain focus and intention throughout, monitoring not just the physical preparation, but the subtle energies that determine whether you're creating medicine or merely flavoured water. When you give it to the cow the next morning, your hands trembling slightly from nervousness and exhaustion, she recovers within 2 days, her cough disappearing and her milk production actually improving to levels better than before she fell ill. Your father attributes this to the herbs and your grandmother's excellent knowledge. Your mother credits prayer and divine intervention, and you learn your first lesson about magical success. Let other people explain it however makes them comfortable. Word of your family's excellent cow remedies spreads through the village with the speed of all gossip in small communities where entertainment is scarce and everyone knows everyone else's business. Soon, neighbours are asking for help with their own sick animals, a pig that won't eat, chickens that have stopped laying, a horse that's gone lame for no apparent reason. Your grandmother realises that your education needs to accelerate, because having a reputation for unusual success is both valuable and dangerous in a world where the line between blessed by God and cursed by the devil often depends on politics, personality, and how much people happen to like you personally. You begin meeting with her before dawn and after sunset, when the village is either still asleep or settling down for the night, learning not just about herbs and healing, but about introduces you to what she calls the network, a loose collection of women and a few men throughout the region who maintain the ancient knowledge despite the growing pressure to abandon anything that wasn't explicitly approved by church authorities. There's the midwife 2 villages over who never loses a mother in childbirth, arriving at bedsides with perfect timing and carrying remedies that somehow always work when conventional methods fail. There's the blacksmith whose horseshoes never come loose, who can shoe a horse so it moves more smoothly than ever has before, and whose iron somehow resists rust longer than it should. There's the baker whose bread stays fresh for weeks, who can make loaves rise perfectly even when the weather is wrong for it, and whose customers seem to recover from illnesses faster than people who buy bread elsewhere. They communicate through coded conversations and subtle signs, sharing information about everything from weather patterns to which church officials might be more tolerant of folk healing than others. This network operates under a complex system of mutual protection and plausible deniability that would impress modern intelligence agencies. When someone needs help that goes beyond conventional solutions, requests are passed along carefully vetted chains of communication. A message might travel through 5 people before reaching the person who can actually solve the problem, with each link in the chain knowing only what they need to know and nothing more. The final solution always appears to be the result of conventional methods, lucky timing, or divine intervention, with any unusual elements carefully obscured or explained away. You learn to be part of this system, carrying messages you don't fully understand, and providing assistance while maintaining complete ignorance about anything unusual, developing the kind of selective blindness that allows everyone to help each other while preserving everyone's safety. Your adolescent years are spent mastering this double life with the kind of dedication that would impress modern teenagers if they weren't too busy complaining about much less dangerous forms of social pressure. During the day, you perfect your performance as a slightly above average peasant girl. You learn to cook, clean, and manage household tasks with competence, but not suspicious excellence. Good enough to be helpful, not so good that people start wondering where you learned skills that seem beyond your years. You attend church services and mouth the correct prayers at the appropriate times, though you privately maintain your own relationship with the divine that involves significantly more attention to natural cycles and considerably less guilt about human nature. You master the art of appearing interested in village gossip while actually gathering information about who's ill, who's struggling, and who might need help. They're afraid to ask for directly, but your real education happens in the margins of ordinary life. You learn to read signs in everything. The behaviour of animals that indicates weather, changes days in advance. The patterns of cloud formation that predict not just rain, but the kind of rain and how long it will last. The subtle changes in people's energy that indicate illness, emotional distress, or dishonesty before they're even consciously aware of these states themselves. You develop an intuitive understanding of timing that goes far beyond simply knowing when to plant crops or when storms are approaching. You begin to sense the underlying currents that connect all things, like invisible rivers of energy flowing through the world, and how small adjustments in one area can create significant changes elsewhere. The way helping one person heal can somehow make their entire family healthier, or how blessing a field can improve the yield of neighbouring farms as well. Your reputation as someone who's lucky with herbs grows carefully and gradually, like a plant that's been properly tended. When the baker's daughter develops a persistent rash that won't respond to conventional treatments, you happen to suggest a particular combination of plants that clears it up completely, though you're careful to mention that you learned about it from your grandmother's vast knowledge of traditional remedies. When one of the village boys breaks his arm falling from a tree, you assist the conventional bone setter while quietly adding elements that ensure the break heals straight and strong, though your contributions appear to be nothing more than helpful suggestions about positioning and herbal poultices. Each success adds to your standing in the community while appearing to be nothing more than good fortune or excellent traditional knowledge passed down through generations. The constant vigilance required for this lifestyle is mentally exhausting in ways that are difficult for modern people to imagine. Every word must be considered before you speak it, every success carefully attributed to acceptable sources, every failure blamed on factors beyond your control, rather than acknowledged as the natural result of working with forces you're still learning to understand. You learn to hide not just your abilities, but your intelligence, your observations about human nature, and your growing understanding of how power really works in medieval society, who has it, who wants it, and how easily it can be turned against those who seem to threaten the established order. The performance of being ordinary becomes so convincing that sometimes you almost believe it yourself. Like an actor who's played the same role for so long they've forgotten who they were before, except for those moments in the deep forest when you let yourself work with the full extent of your abilities and remember what you truly are. Young adulthood and establishment, age 19, 25. After years of careful preparation and cautious practice, you transition into what medieval society considers proper adulthood, which mostly means people now expect you to get married, produce children, and somehow maintain a household on resources that would challenge a modern minimalist. The transition from adolescence to full womanhood brings with it new freedoms and new dangers in equal measure. The freedom to make your own choices about whom to help and how, balanced against the increased scrutiny that comes with being old enough to be held fully responsible for your actions. You're 19 when you officially become the village's unofficial wise woman, a role that nobody discusses openly but everyone understands, like the fact that the priest drinks too much communion wine, or that the miller's weights aren't quite accurate when he's measuring grain for people he doesn't particularly like. This transition happens gradually, then all at once, as these things do. It starts when old Martha, who's been the village's go-to person for women's troubles and difficult childbirths for 30 years, finally succumbs to the lung fever that's been slowly killing her for months. You attend her deathbed, along with several other village women, and in her final lucid moments, she grips your hand with surprising strength and whispers something that sounds like a blessing, but might also be a warning. Her death leaves a gap in the community that needs filling, and your years of discreetly successful herb mixing have made you the obvious candidate, though naturally no one says this directly. Instead, people begin showing up at your family's cottage with vague requests for something to help with sleep, or whatever works so well for the baker's daughter, their eyes holding that particular combination of hope and embarrassment that comes with needing help they can't openly ask for. Your first major case comes when the merchant's wife, a woman who considers herself far too refined for peasant remedies, finds herself desperate enough to seek your help. She arrives at your door on a grey November afternoon, wrapped in a wool cloak that probably cost more than your family's entire yearly income, her face carefully composed, but her hands betraying her nervousness as they twist the fabric of her expensive sleeves. She's been trying to conceive for 3 years, and after consulting with physicians in the nearest town, who've charged her considerable sums to recommend prayer, bloodletting, and dietary restrictions that have accomplished nothing, she arrives at your door with the kind of carefully maintained dignity that suggests she's swallowed most of her pride, but is trying to keep the last bit intact. The conversation requires delicate navigation, includes dietary changes designed to improve her overall health, timing recommendations based on lunar cycles and her own body's rhythms, and subtle energy work that you disguise as massage techniques for relaxation. Within 4 months, she's pregnant, and within a year, she's delivered a healthy son whose robust constitution and easy temperament surprise everyone, including the midwife who attends the birth. She credits divine intervention and the expensive prayers she's been having said at the cathedral, but she also quietly spreads word among her social circle that your herbs seem to be blessed with unusual effectiveness. This success establishes your reputation among the village's more prosperous families, which is crucial because these are the people who have the most to lose if accusations of witchcraft start flying around, and therefore the most motivation to ensure that your work is seen as purely traditional folk healing. They become your unwitting protectors, because having Lady So-and-so vouch for your Christian character and conventional methods makes you significantly safer than you would be with only peasant testimonials. Their support creates a protective bubble around your practice, as few people are willing to accuse someone of dark dealings when that someone has successfully helped the merchant's wife, the blacksmith's daughter, and the baker's elderly mother, all of whom are respected members of the community with social connections that matter. The marriage question becomes increasingly pressing as you approach your 20th birthday. In medieval society, unmarried women of your age are viewed with suspicion for entirely practical reasons. Without a husband's protection and a household to manage, you're essentially a loose end in a social system that doesn't handle loose ends well. Spinsters are often the first to be blamed when crops fail or livestock sicken, not necessarily because people believe they're actually responsible, but because they're convenient scapegoats without male relatives to defend them. But marriage also presents obvious complications for someone whose real work requires secrecy, unusual hours, and the ability to disappear into the forest for days at a time when particular herbs are in season, or when someone needs help that can't wait for daylight. You solve this problem through a combination of strategy and genuine affection. There's a young man in the village, Thomas, the carpenter's second son, who's intelligent enough to notice that your folk remedies work considerably better than average, but practical enough not to ask too many questions about why. He's observed you from a distance for months, noting how you move through the village with quiet confidence, how people's faces change when they speak to you, and how problems seem to resolve themselves after you've offered your help. He's also kind, reasonably attractive in a solid, dependable way, and suffers from the mild, social awkwardness that makes him grateful for attention from someone like you, who actually listens when he talks about wood grain patterns and joint construction techniques with the passion that other young men reserve for discussing horses or hunting. Your courtship is conducted with all the romance that medieval peasant life allows, which is to say very little, but with a foundation of mutual respect and compatible practical needs that serves you both well. You take walks together through the village and surrounding fields, conversations flowing easily as you discuss everything from the best wood for different types of construction to the healing properties of various plants, though you're careful to frame your knowledge as things your grandmother taught you rather than abilities you've developed. Thomas needs a wife who can manage a household competently and won't interfere with his work. You need a husband who won't interfere with yours. The fact that you genuinely enjoy each other's company and find comfort in each other's presence is a bonus that puts you ahead of most medieval marriages, which are typically arranged for economic advantage rather than personal compatibility. Your wedding takes place on a bright June morning, with all the conventional celebration the village can muster, which involves a lot of beer that's been brewing since spring, some enthusiastic dancing that continues well past sunset, dressed in his best tunic, his hair freshly cut, and his face bearing the expression of a man who's generally content with his life choices, but isn't entirely sure how he ended up at the centre of so much attention. The priest performs the ceremony with the appropriate solemnity, and you exchange vows that are probably more sincere than most, given that you both have realistic expectations about what marriage actually entails. Your new household becomes the perfect cover for expanding your practice. As a married woman, you have both the social standing and the practical independence to help people with problems that require more discretion than your childhood herb mixing. The cottage that you and Thomas establish becomes a sanctuary where people can speak freely about ailments and troubles they wouldn't dare discuss elsewhere. Women come to you with questions about preventing pregnancy when they already have more children than they can feed, ending unwanted pregnancies that would bring shame or financial ruin, and dealing with husbands who express their frustrations through violence that leaves bruises in places that don't show. Men seek your help with problems they can't discuss with other men. Impotence that threatens their marriages and their sense of masculinity. Persistent illnesses that affect their ability to work and provide for their families. And the kind of emotional distress that medieval masculinity doesn't allow them to acknowledge. Thomas proves to be an ideal partner for this work, not because he actively participates, though he sometimes helps with gathering herbs during his morning walks and has developed an excellent eye for identifying useful plants, but because he creates the perfect atmosphere of normalcy around your activities. When people visit your cottage for remedies, he's usually in his workshop, focused on his carpentry and creating just enough noise with his tools to provide acoustic privacy for sensitive conversations. His steady sawing and hammering serves as a natural sound barrier that allows people to speak freely without fear of being overheard. When you need to disappear for nighttime work, attending difficult births, gathering herbs under specific lunar conditions, or helping with problems that require darkness for discretion, he covers for you with casual mentions of visiting sick relatives or attending to women's troubles that require female assistance at all hours. Your reputation grows carefully during these years, spreading through the complex networks that connect medieval communities like invisible threads binding distant places together. A successful treatment in your village leads to requests from neighbouring settlements, carried by travellers who've witnessed your work or heard stories from satisfied patients. A satisfied customer recommends you to relatives in market towns, where your reputation can spread among merchants and craftspeople who travel wide territories. Word travels along trade routes and through the social connections that link everyone from peasants to minor nobility, all while maintaining the careful fiction that you're simply unusually skilled with traditional remedies passed down through generations of wise women. By your 25th birthday, you've established yourself as the person people seek out when conventional solutions fail and desperation overrides caution. Your cottage has become an unofficial clinic where the hopeless find hope, where problems that have resisted prayers, bloodletting, and expensive physicians somehow yield to your gentle touch and carefully prepared remedies. Though, of course, no one calls it that. To external observers, you're simply a married woman who's particularly good with herbs and has been blessed with an unusual run of good fortune in your treatments, perhaps favoured by God for your piety and charitable nature. The reality that you've successfully created a practice that serves your community while protecting yourself from persecution represents a level of achievement that would challenge any modern entrepreneur, accomplished entirely without business plans, marketing strategies, or legal protections, relying instead on reputation, discretion, and an intuitive understanding of human nature that allows you to help people while keeping everyone safe. Peak practice years, age 26-40, careful foundation building, you enter what you'll later recognise as the golden period of your practice. Those precious years when your reputation is established enough to bring you the difficult cases, but not so prominent that you attract unwanted attention from church authorities who might have opinions about your success rate. The balance is delicate, like walking a tightrope suspended between obscurity and notoriety, requiring constant adjustment to maintain your position in that sweet spot where you're known enough to help people, but not so famous that bishops start asking uncomfortable questions. You're 26 when you realise that you've somehow achieved the impossible. You're making a decent living as a healer in an era when most people die of preventable diseases, and you're doing it while maintaining the careful facade of being nothing more than a village woman with a talent for traditional remedies and an unusual streak of good fortune. Your days begin before dawn, not because you're particularly fond of early rising, though you've grown to appreciate the peaceful quality of the pre-dawn hours, but because the time between night and morning is when you can work with the full extent of your abilities without worrying about unexpected visitors who might arrive seeking help and witness more than they should. This is when you prepare the complex remedies that require precise timing, specific lunar phases, and the kind of focused intention that's difficult to maintain when you're constantly listening for footsteps on the path or voices calling your name. Your cottage in these early hours becomes something between a laboratory and a temple, filled with the soft sounds of grinding herbs in your stone mortar, the gentle bubbling of decoctions simmering over carefully banked coals, and your own whispered words as you weave intention into each preparation, like an invisible thread that binds the physical and spiritual aspects of healing. The morning ritual has become as essential to your practice as the herbs themselves. You begin by centering yourself, feeling the energy of the earth beneath your feet and the subtle currents that flow through all living things. Then comes the careful selection of ingredients, not just based on their known properties, but guided by an intuitive understanding of what each patient needs, which combinations will work synergistically, and how much of your own energy to invest in each preparation. The actual mixing requires a meditative focus that transforms routine tasks into something approaching sacred ceremony, though you'd never use such language where anyone else could hear it. Thomas has learned to sleep through these sessions, though he occasionally wakes to find you standing in the garden at 3 in the morning, harvesting plants by moonlight with the kind of precision that suggests you can see in the dark, which, increasingly, you realise you actually can. Your night vision has improved dramatically over the years, whether from spending so much time working in darkness or from some other development you don't fully understand. He's developed the admirable habit of asking no questions about these nocturnal activities, though he's also become adept at providing alibis when neighbours mention seeing strange lights from your windows, or catching the scent of unfamiliar herbs on the night breeze that seems to carry farther than it should. Your client base during these peak years spans the entire social spectrum of medieval life, though they all approach you through the same careful networks of referral and coded language that protect everyone involved. Lady Margaret, the Lord's wife, suffers from what she describes as melancholy of the spirits, what we might now recognise as severe depression following the loss of 2 children in infancy, and visits you monthly for preparations that restore her mental balance and give her the energy to manage her considerable household responsibilities. She arrives always in a plain cloak with her face partially covered, accompanied by a single trusted servant, and maintains the fiction that she's consulting you about women's health matters, monthly cycles, difficulties with conception, or other ailments that provide perfect cover for both of you. She always brings fine cloth or expensive spices as payment, transactions that appear to be simple trade between women rather than medical consultations. At the other end of the social scale, you regularly treat the families of serfs and labourers who have no other options when illness strikes, and no money for physicians, even if they were available. Young Willem, the blacksmith's apprentice, develops a persistent cough that threatens to turn into the lung rot that killed his father and several other men in the village over the past few years. His master brings him to you after the conventional treatments. Prayer, bloodletting, and rest have failed to provide any improvement. You prepare a complex treatment that combines respiratory herbs with what you privately call clearing the channels of breath, a technique that involves energy work focusing on the flow of life force through the lungs and airways, something you certainly can't explain to anyone else. The treatment requires multiple sessions over several weeks, during which you gradually teach Willem breathing exercises disguised as traditional methods for strengthening the lungs, while actually working with subtle energies to heal the damage. Willem recovers completely and goes on to become the village's head blacksmith, though he never forgets that he owes his livelihood to your intervention. Your practice during these years becomes increasingly sophisticated as you develop techniques that go far beyond simple herbalism. You learn to read the energy patterns of illness like a map, to sense emotional distress that manifests as physical symptoms, the way grief settles in the chest, how anger creates tension in the neck and shoulders, how fear disrupts digestion, and to work with the subtle forces that medieval people vaguely understand as humours, but that you experience as the actual flow of life force through the human body. You develop diagnostic methods that allow you to identify problems weeks before they would be apparent to conventional observation, sensing the early stages of illness through changes in a person's energy field, detecting pregnancy almost immediately through shifts in the woman's spiritual essence, identifying emotional troubles through subtle alterations in how people carry themselves. Your treatment approaches evolve to address root causes rather than just symptoms, though explaining this requires considerable creativity. When you treat someone for persistent headaches, you might address not just the immediate pain, but the underlying stress patterns that create it, working with energy points that correspond to emotional blockages, while explaining your actions as traditional massage techniques passed down through generations. When helping with fertility issues, you consider not just physical factors, but emotional readiness, relationship dynamics, and even what you sense about the souls waiting to be born, though you frame this as ensuring the body is prepared for the blessing of children. The constant challenge is finding ways to explain your successes that don't invite uncomfortable questions. When you correctly predict that the baker will develop joint pain 3 weeks before it appears, you attribute this to observing his work habits and knowing that repetitive motions cause problems over time, rather than mentioning that you can see the inflammation building in his energy field. When you successfully treat a child's seizures using a combination of herbs and energy balancing that works with the flow of life force through the nervous system, you explain it as an old family recipe passed down from your grandmother, complete with invented stories about how she learned it from her grandmother in turn. The art lies in providing just enough conventional explanation to satisfy curiosity while delivering results that speak for themselves. Your reputation spreads beyond your immediate region through the complex networks that connect medieval communities. Traders who carry news along with goods and share stories of remarkable healers they've encountered. Pilgrims travelling to religious sites who exchange information about helpful people they've met along their journeys, and the extended family connections that link villages across considerable distances through marriages, shared occupations, and seasonal migrations. By your 30th birthday, his journey away. People who've heard through these networks that there's a woman in your village who has unusual success treating problems that others consider hopeless. These distant clients present both opportunities and risks that require careful management. Their willingness to travel significant distances for your help confirms your growing reputation and provides income that allows you to maintain your practice without depending solely on local resources. They often pay better than local clients, having already invested considerably in travel expenses and being correspondingly motivated to find effective treatment, but they also represent potential exposure to authorities who might take interest in someone whose fame spreads too widely, or whose success rate seems to exceed what should be possible with conventional methods. You develop careful protocols for handling these cases. Initial consultations through intermediaries who can screen potential problems. Treatments provided during seasonal fairs when strangers are expected in the area and their presence won't attract notice. And payment structures that look like normal commerce rather than medical practice. Your relationship with the local church during these years requires constant diplomatic navigation that would challenge a modern politician. Father Benedict, who served your village for nearly a decade, is a practical man who values results over theological purity and understands that his parishioners' physical welfare affects their spiritual well-being. But he's also answerable to superiors who take a dimmer view of folk healing that's too effective. You maintain your relationship with him through a combination of regular attendance at services, where you sit attentively and participate appropriately in all responses, generous contributions to church maintenance, using your increased income to support roof repairs and altar decorations, and the occasional consultation about which remedies might be acceptably traditional versus suspiciously effective. When his own mother develops the wasting sickness that claims so many elderly people, a gradual decline that conventional medicine can only watch helplessly, he quietly asks for your help while maintaining the official position that he's simply consulting you about herbal knowledge his mother might have used in her youth. The conversation takes place in the church garden after evening services, couched in careful language about traditional remedies that good Christian women have always used, and the wisdom that God provides through his creation. You treat her successfully using a combination of strengthening herbs and energy work that you describe as prayer and laying on of hands, and she recovers enough to live 3 more comfortable years, but the entire episode is conducted through layers of plausible deniability that protect both of you from accusations of inappropriate collaboration between church and folk practice. Your marriage during these years deepens into genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting the life you've built together. Thomas never fully understands the extent of your abilities. He sees the successful treatments and the grateful clients, but remains unaware of the more unusual aspects of your work. But he recognizes that your practice serves essential needs in your community, and that you've found a way to do important work safely. He becomes skilled at the subtle deflections and casual explanations that protect your reputation, mentioning your excellent knowledge of traditional remedies when people ask about your successes, and providing practical support that makes your work possible. You learn to appreciate his solid presence as both emotional support and practical cover for your more unusual activities, and the way he creates an atmosphere of domestic normalcy that makes everything else seem less extraordinary. By your 40th birthday, you've achieved something remarkable, a sustainable practice that serves your community's healing needs while keeping you safe from persecution. You've developed expertise that rivals any formal medical training available in your era, combining traditional knowledge with intuitive abilities and energy work that produces results far superior to conventional treatments. You spans the social spectrum from peasants to minor nobility, creating a web of protection through mutual benefit and shared secrets. You've created a life that allows you to use your abilities fully while maintaining the appearance of conventional respectability, and you've learned to find deep satisfaction in the quiet knowledge that your work makes a real difference in people's lives. Even if you can never receive public recognition for your actual skills, the exhausting vigilance required to maintain this double life has become second nature, like breathing or walking, something you do automatically without conscious thought, a reflexive caution that keeps you safe while allowing you to flourish in the narrow space between obscurity and exposure. The art of spellcraft and secret knowledge, age 30, 45. After years of practicing basic herbalism and energy work under careful disguise, you enter the period when your understanding deepens into what can only be called true mastery, though naturally you'd never use such a grandiose term, since grandiosity is exactly the kind of attitude that gets people burned at stakes. The transition into this deeper knowledge feels less like learning new skills and more like awakening to abilities that were always there, waiting for the right combination of experience, wisdom, and necessity to emerge. Instead, you think of it as finally understanding how all the pieces fit together. The herbs, the timing, the energy work, and the delicate balance of intention that turns simple healing into something that approaches art. Your collection of knowledge during these years becomes both more sophisticated and more carefully hidden, where once you relied on your grandmother's teachings and the shared wisdom of the local network, you now begin developing your own innovations and discoveries, building on traditional foundations to create techniques that are uniquely yours. You learn to read the subtle energy signatures of different illnesses, like a language written in light and shadow, to sense the underlying emotional and spiritual imbalances that manifest as physical symptoms, and to work with forces that have no names in any language you could safely speak aloud. This deepening understanding comes gradually through years of careful observation and gentle experimentation, each success building confidence, while each failure teaches crucial lessons about the limits and dangers of what you're attempting. The physical organisation of your materials becomes an exercise in creative concealment that would impress any spy. Your cottage contains what appears to be a normal collection of household herbs and supplies, but hidden throughout are substances and preparations that would require considerable explanation if discovered by unfriendly eyes. The rosemary hanging from your kitchen rafters includes plants gathered during specific lunar phases and charged with protective intentions through hours of focused meditation. The salt in your larder contains crystals blessed under particular stellar alignments, each grain infused with energy that can neutralize negative influences or enhance the potency of other preparations. Even your everyday cooking herbs have been selected and prepared with attention to their metaphysical properties as well as their culinary uses. The sage that flavours your stews also cleanses spiritual atmosphere, and the thyme that preserves your meat carries protective energies that extend to everyone who shares your table. Your workroom, a corner of the cottage that officially serves as storage for Thomas's carpentry supplies, conceals your true laboratory through an arrangement so carefully planned that even you sometimes marvel at its ingenuity. Behind stacks of seasoned wood and tool cases, you've created a space where you can work with complete privacy. Here, you maintain your most sensitive preparations, tinctures that must be stirred with silver tools under moonlight, their surfaces shimmering with more than reflected illumination, powders that require months of careful aging in specific conditions, developing potencies that increase rather than diminish over time, and oils infused with plants that most people don't even know exist, increasingly sophisticated during these years, developing into a complex science that tracks celestial influences with the precision of an astronomer, where once you worked with basic lunar phases and seasonal changes, you now track complex astronomical cycles that affect the potency of your preparations and the effectiveness of your treatments. You learn that certain herbs are most powerful when harvested, not just during specific moon phases, but when particular stars are visible in the pre-dawn sky, when planetary alignments create subtle energy shifts that amplify natural properties, or when the intersection of multiple natural cycles creates windows of exceptional potential that open only briefly and must be seized with perfect timing. This knowledge requires you to maintain mental calendars that track dozens of overlapping cycles simultaneously, a feat of memory that becomes possible only through years of practice and an almost instinctive attunement to natural rhythms. You know not only when to plant and harvest, but when to begin treatments for maximum effectiveness, when to perform protective rituals that shield your work from detection, and when to avoid any magical activity, because the prevailing energies would make success unlikely or dangerous. The complexity of this scheduling system would challenge any modern computer program, but you maintain it entirely in memory, because written records would constitute evidence that no amount of explanation could make innocuous. Your diagnostic abilities during this period reach levels that seem miraculous even to you, evolving from good intuition to something approaching supernatural perception. You learn to identify illnesses weeks before symptoms appear, sensing the early energetic disturbances that precede physical manifestation. You can detect emotional traumas that manifest as recurring physical problems, the way grief settles in the lungs and creates persistent coughs, how rage accumulates in the liver and causes digestive problems, or how fear lodges in the kidneys and weakens the entire system. Most challengingly, you begin to recognize when someone's distress stems from external influences that go beyond normal human difficulties, curses, hexes, and what you might charitably call negative energy work performed by practitioners whose ethics are considerably more flexible than your own. Dealing with magical attacks requires both technical skill and political sensitivity that would challenge a modern diplomat. When you determine that someone's persistent run of bad luck stems from deliberate malice rather than natural causes, you must provide protection without escalating whatever conflict led to the original problem. You develop techniques for breaking harmful spells that appear to be simple folk remedies, protective sachets that look like ordinary herb pouches but contain carefully charged materials arranged in patterns that create shields against negative energy, cleansing baths that seem like normal hygiene practices but actually wash away spiritual contamination, and energy shields that manifest as improvement in the victim's general health and confidence, making them less vulnerable to future attacks while revealing nothing about the true nature of their protection. Your teaching activities during these years operate under layers of secrecy that would make modern intelligence agencies proud. You identify young people who show potential, usually women, though occasionally men whose circumstances allow them to work discreetly, and begin their education through what appears to be normal instruction in household management and traditional healing. The process of identification itself requires careful observation over months or years, watching for signs of natural sensitivity, emotional stability, and the crucial ability to keep secrets even under pressure. The real curriculum is embedded within conventional activities, learning to sense plant energies while gathering herbs for cooking, developing energy awareness through what seems like instruction in reading people's moods and health, and practicing protective techniques disguised as traditional several years of what appears to be normal mentorship in women's work, carefully structured to build skills gradually while maintaining perfect cover. While teaching her to spin wool, you show her how to weave protective intentions into thread, creating fabrics that carry beneficial energy to whoever wears them. While instructing her in cheese making, you explain how fermentation parallels the energy transformations involved in healing work, using the familiar process of milk becoming cheese as a metaphor for more complex spiritual transformations. By the time she's 18, she has a solid foundation in both conventional skills and magical practice, all acquired through activities that would appear perfectly normal to any observer. Your network of fellow practitioners becomes increasingly important during these years, both as a source of knowledge and as a mutual protection system that spans hundreds of miles. You maintain contact with healers throughout the region through coded communications that travel along trade routes and family connections, creating an intelligence network disguised as normal social correspondence. Information about new techniques, warnings about increased scrutiny from church authorities, and updates about which areas might be safer or more dangerous to practice in. All of this flows through channels that appear to be ordinary letters between friends and relatives, but actually constitute a sophisticated early warning system. When Margaret, a practitioner 2 villages over, is arrested on suspicion of witchcraft, the network responds with coordinated action that appears entirely coincidental, but represents years of careful planning for exactly such emergencies. Her clients suddenly remember that they sought her help for perfectly conventional problems, headaches, digestive troubles, and women's complaints that any traditional healer might address. Other practitioners in the area temporarily suspend activities that might draw attention, reverting to purely conventional methods until the danger passes. A merchant who's secretly part of the network happens to be present during her interrogation and later reports that her story remained consistent and that she showed no signs of the demonic influence the investigators were trained to detect. She's released after 2 weeks of questioning, though she subsequently relocates to a distant village where her past is unknown and where other network members help establish her new identity. Your own close calls during this period reinforce the importance of maintaining perfect cover and the constant vigilance required to survive in this dangerous profession. When a travelling inquisitor visits your region investigating reports of unusual healing successes, you temporarily transform your practice into exactly what it appears to be: conventional folk medicine with no unusual elements whatsoever. Your treatments during his month-long stay rely entirely on well-known herbs used in traditional ways. Your diagnostic methods involve only observation and conventional wisdom passed down through generations, and your success rate drops to normal levels. It's frustrating to watch people suffer when you can easily help them, but the alternative is potentially fatal exposure for not just yourself, but everyone connected to your network. The Inquisitor interviews several of your clients, but finds nothing suspicious in their accounts, partly because you've spent years training them to describe your work in acceptable terms. To them, you're simply a woman who's particularly skilled with traditional remedies and has been blessed with good fortune in your treatments. Your reputation for piety, carefully maintained through regular church attendance and generous donations, serves you well, as does your marriage to a respected craftsman whose own reputation vouches for your character. After weeks of investigation that include searches of your cottage, revealing nothing but normal household supplies, observations of your daily routine, perfectly conventional, and interrogations of neighbours who describe you as devout, helpful, and unremarkable, the Inquisitor concludes that reports of your unusual success were exaggerated by grateful patients and moves on to investigate other, less carefully protected practitioners. age 45, you've developed abilities that would be considered extraordinary in any era, but you've also mastered the art of hiding your light under the medieval equivalent of a bushel. Your knowledge encompasses healing techniques that won't be formally recognised for centuries, diagnostic methods that exceed what trained physicians can accomplish, and an understanding of human energy systems that integrates physical, emotional, and spiritual healing in ways that modern medicine is only beginning to rediscover. Yet, to the world around you, you remain simply a village woman who's handy with herbs and blessed with an unusual run of good luck in your treatments. The constant concealment required to maintain this fiction has become so natural that you sometimes forget the extent of your own abilities, like a master craftsman who's become so skilled that complex work feels effortless. When you successfully treat conditions that others consider hopeless, when you prevent disasters through timely intervention, or when you protect your community from threats they never even know existed, it all seems like normal work rather than the extraordinary achievements they actually represent. Perhaps this humble perspective is itself part of your protection, because practitioners who begin to believe their own cover stories about being just lucky with herbs are probably safer than those who fully recognise the magnitude of their abilities and the dangers those abilities would create if discovered. Growing suspicion and dangerous times. Age 41, 50. After 2 decades of careful practice and gradual reputation building, you begin to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere around your work that suggest the relatively safe period you've enjoyed might be coming to an end. It starts with small things, longer pauses in conversations when you enter a room, as if people need a moment to choose their words more carefully, whispered discussions that stop abruptly when you approach, leaving an awkward silence that hangs in the air like smoke, and the kind of sideways glances that indicate people are talking about you in ways they don't want you to overhear. The shift is gradual enough that you might dismiss it as imagination, but your years of reading people's energy tell you that something fundamental has changed in how you're perceived. At 41, you've become successful enough at healing that your very success is starting to attract the wrong kind of attention. The signs of increasing danger develop gradually, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon, dark and ominous, but still far enough away that you can hope they might pass without touching your life. The new priest, Father Edmund, who replaced the practical and tolerant Father Benedict last spring after the older man was transferred to a monastery. Some say voluntarily, others whisper it was encouraged by superiors who found his approach too lenient, demonstrates considerably less flexibility regarding what he considers appropriate folk healing versus suspicious practices that require investigation. He's younger than his predecessor, recently trained in the newest methods of identifying and combating heretical practices, and he brings with him an intensity that makes everyone in the village more cautious about anything that might be construed as unconventional. His sermons begin including pointed references to the dangers of consulting with wise women whose knowledge might derive from ungodly sources, and he makes it clear that he considers any healing success that exceeds normal expectations to be worthy of scrutiny. Your response to this changing environment requires careful recalibration of everything you've built over the past 2 decades, like rebuilding a house while still living in it. You begin reducing the more dramatic aspects of your practice, focusing on treatments that provide genuine help but achieve results slowly enough to avoid attracting notice. The miraculous recoveries that once built your reputation become liabilities in the current climate, so you learn to pace your successes, sometimes holding back your full abilities, even when you know you can provide complete healing, choosing instead to help gradually in ways that appear to watch people suffer longer than necessary, but you've learned that saving one person dramatically might prevent you from helping dozens more over time. The network of practitioners throughout the region begins operating under increased security measures that would be impressive if they weren't so terrifying. Communications that once travelled openly through normal social channels now require multiple layers of coded language and careful timing that make every message a potential liability. Instead of direct messages about techniques or warnings, information flows through seemingly innocent conversations about crop rotations, family news, and local gossip that contain embedded meanings recognisable only to those trained to read them. A comment about how well the herbs grew this season might actually convey information about which remedies are proving most effective, while mention of a neighbour's illness could be code for warning about increased surveillance in that area. When word reaches you that Anna, the midwife in the next village over, has been arrested on charges of witchcraft, the entire network goes into what amounts to emergency protocol. Anna was known for never losing a mother during childbirth, a track record so unusual that it eventually attracted official attention, despite her careful efforts to attribute her success to prayer and traditional methods passed down through generations of faithful Christian women. Her arrest sends ripples of fear through every practitioner in the region, because if someone as careful and well respected as Anna could be taken, none of you are truly safe. The news arrives through the network's communication channels like a cold wind that makes everyone shiver and look over their shoulders. The details of Anna's case pass through the network in fragments over several weeks, like pieces of a horrible puzzle, provide a terrifying education in how quickly a life built on careful concealment can unravel. Her troubles began when she successfully delivered twins to a woman who'd been told by the local physician that both babies and mother would surely die, a prediction that would have proven accurate if Anna hadn't spent 3 days and nights using every technique she knew to keep all three alive. The physician, unwilling to admit that his expertise had been exceeded by an illiterate village woman, suggested that such an impossible survival could only be explained by supernatural intervention of the darker sort. The local authorities, already sensitised to look for signs of witchcraft by recent directives from church hierarchy emphasising the need for increased vigilance, decided to investigate what they saw as a suspiciously miraculous occurrence. Anna's interrogation follows the established patterns that you've heard about, but hope never to experience directly. A methodical process designed to extract confessions, regardless of actual guilt. They search her home and find the extensive collection of herbs that any competent midwife would maintain, but interpret the variety and careful organisation as evidence of suspicious knowledge beyond what a simple woman should possess. They question her clients and discover the pattern of unusual success that she spent years trying to downplay, each testimony intended as character witness somehow becoming evidence against her. Most damaging of all, they apply the standard tests designed to detect supernatural abilities, tests that are specifically crafted to produce incriminating results regardless of the subject's actual guilt or innocence, including physical examinations for devil's marks and questions designed to trap the accused in apparent contradictions. The network's response to Anna's arrest demonstrates both the strengths and limitations of your mutual protection system, revealing how much you can accomplish together and how helpless you ultimately are when the authorities focus their attention on one of your own. Within days, every practitioner in the region has received coded warnings about increased scrutiny, passed along through the carefully maintained channels that have protected you all for years. Those with the most dangerous materials begin destroying or hiding evidence that could be misinterpreted. Rare books that contain knowledge no suspended, and everyone focuses on maintaining the most conventional possible profile. But there's ultimately nothing anyone can do to help Anna directly without exposing themselves to the same risks. Your own household becomes a model of careful normalcy during this period, every action calculated to reinforce your reputation as an entirely conventional village woman. Thomas, who's always been skilled at providing casual explanations for your activities, becomes even more deliberate about establishing your conventional credentials. He makes sure that your church attendance is not only regular, but visible, volunteering you for normal women's activities, like cleaning the altar linens and helping with feast day preparations. Your herb collection is winnowed down to plants that any competent housewife might keep: sage for cooking and minor ailments, lavender for freshening linens, chamomile for sleeplessness, with the more unusual specimens either destroyed or hidden in locations that would require extraordinary effort to discover, buried in the forest, or sealed in containers that appear to hold something entirely different. The psychological strain of maintaining this heightened vigilance while continuing to help people who genuinely need your assistance creates a constant state of exhaustion that goes far beyond simple physical tiredness. You find yourself calculating the risks of every interaction, weighing whether helping someone with a serious problem is worth the potential exposure that could destroy not only your life, but the carefully constructed safety of your entire network. When the blacksmith's daughter develops the kind of fever that typically kills children within days, burning them from the inside while their parents watch helplessly, you struggle with the knowledge that you could save her easily, but that doing so might attract attention that could destroy not only your life, but the lives of everyone connected to you. You ultimately decide to help the child, but you do it through a treatment plan that appears to be entirely conventional, while incorporating elements that ensure its effectiveness. The herbal preparations you provide are standard fever remedies that any village woman might know: willow bark for the heat, elderflower to promote sweating, and cooling herbs to make the child more comfortable, but gathered and prepared with attention to timing and intention that makes them considerably more potent than their mundane appearance suggests. The recovery takes 2 weeks instead of the 2 days you could have achieved with more direct methods, but the girl survives, and her gradual improvement appears natural to anyone observing the case, including Father Edmund, who visits the family during the child's illness. Father Edmund's increasing scrutiny of your activities forces you to develop new levels of subtlety in your work that require constant mental effort to maintain. His questions about your herb knowledge are phrased as pastoral interest in his parishioners' welfare, inquiring about traditional remedies he might recommend to other families, but you recognise them as intelligence gathering, designed to determine whether your expertise exceeds what would be reasonable for someone with your background. You respond by demonstrating exactly the level of knowledge that a village woman might have learned from her grandmother: competent but not extraordinary, traditional but not innovative, carefully avoiding any mention of techniques or plants that might suggest formal training or supernatural assistance. When he asks specifically about your success rate with difficult cases, you've prepared an explanation that attributes your results to careful observation, willingness to try multiple approaches when simple remedies fail, and the kind of luck that sometimes blesses those who work hard to help others. You mention the cases where your treatments failed, carefully selected examples where conventional methods wouldn't have succeeded either, and you credit your successes to prayer, traditional wisdom passed down through generations, and the natural healing power that God has placed in plants for the benefit of his faithful servants. It's a performance that requires you to downplay years of accumulated knowledge and hard-won expertise, but it successfully maintains your cover, while satisfying his apparent need to categorize you as either harmless or threatening. The months following Anna's arrest bring news that she's been found guilty of practicing witchcraft and sentenced to death by burning, carried out in the town square as a warning to others who might be tempted to similar transgressions. The network receives this information through the same careful channels that carry all our communications, and the impact is devastating beyond the immediate tragedy of losing a skilled and careful practitioner who dedicated her life to helping women through the dangerous process of childbirth. Anna's execution serves as a stark reminder that no amount of caution can provide complete protection, and that the life you've built could be destroyed at any moment by factors beyond your control. A change in local authorities, a client's careless words, or simply the bad luck of being too successful at helping people. Your response to this news involves both practical precautions and emotional processing that you must handle entirely in private, since there's no one with whom you can safely share the full extent of your grief and fear. You destroy several preparations that would be impossible to explain if discovered, oils that shimmer with more than reflected light, powders that maintain their potency for years beyond what should be possible, and tinctures that work far more effectively than their simple ingredients should allow. You temporarily suspend the most advanced aspects of your teaching with Sarah, who's now old enough to understand both the knowledge she's acquiring and the dangers it represents, focusing instead on conventional skills that will serve her well regardless of whether she ever chooses to use her other abilities. But you also spend several sleepless nights confronting the reality that practicing your abilities always involves the possibility of paying with your life, and that continuing to help people requires accepting risks that most rational people would consider unacceptable. You walk through the dark forest where you've gathered herbs for decades, thinking about Anna's final moments, and wondering if you have the courage to continue work that might lead to the same end. The decision to continue isn't made once, but repeatedly, every time someone seeks your help, and you must choose between safety and service. The increased scrutiny during this period forces you to become even more creative about finding ways to serve your community's needs while maintaining perfect cover. You develop techniques for providing healing that appears to be entirely mundane. Dietary suggestions that happen to include herbs with specific therapeutic properties, household tips that incorporate energy clearing practices disguised as cleaning methods, and advice about timing activities according to traditional wisdom that actually follows sophisticated understanding of natural cycles. The result is that people continue to receive help, but in ways so subtle that even they don't realise they're receiving anything beyond common sense guidance from a woman who's been blessed with practical wisdom. Your marriage during this dangerous period deepens into something that goes beyond partnership into genuine conspiracy in the best sense of the word. Thomas never asks directly about the extent of your abilities or the specific nature of the risks you face, but he demonstrates through his actions that he understands both the importance of your work and the seriousness of the threats against it. His casual conversations with other men in the village consistently reinforce your reputation as a pious and conventional woman whose herbal knowledge comes from entirely traditional sources, and he's developed an instinctive ability to redirect conversations that might veer into dangerous territory. By your 50th birthday, you've successfully navigated the most dangerous period of your career without being caught, but the cost has been considerable in ways that go beyond simple material loss. You've been forced to dramatically reduce the scope of your practice, to destroy knowledge that took years to accumulate, and to watch people suffer from problems you could easily solve if you dared to reveal your full abilities. The constant vigilance required to maintain your safety has become a way of life that colours every interaction action and decision, creating a persistent background, stress that you've learned to carry but never fully escape. You've survived, but survival has required sacrificing much of what made your work fulfilling. Later, years and quiet legacy, age 51, 60. After surviving the most dangerous decade of your career, you enter what you gradually come to recognise as a different phase of your practice, one characterised not by growth and expansion, but by consolidation, teaching, and the careful preservation of knowledge for future generations who may face even greater challenges than your own. At 51, you're considered an elder in your village, a status that brings both respect and the freedom that comes from being seen as harmless due to age, which provides perfect cover for your most important work. There's something almost amusing about how being dismissed as just a wise old woman finally grants you the invisibility you've spent decades trying to achieve through careful performance. The world around you continues to change in ways that make your kind of knowledge increasingly valuable and increasingly dangerous, like a precious artifact that becomes both more necessary and more likely to be destroyed with each passing year. The Inquisition's influence spreads through regions that once offered relative safety. Their methodical approach to identifying and eliminating folk practices reaching even remote villages that thought themselves too insignificant to attract official attention. Trade routes bring news of witch trials in distant cities, stories of entire communities torn apart by accusations and counter-accusations, and reports of knowledge keepers who've been silenced forever. The printing press begins spreading standardised religious doctrine that leaves less room for the folk traditions that have always provided cover for practitioners like yourself. As local customs are increasingly measured against written orthodoxy rather than accepted as harmless local variation. Yet, paradoxically, these same changes create opportunities for those clever enough to adapt their methods to new circumstances, as the very forces that threaten traditional practices also create desperate need for the healing and guidance those practices provide. Your teaching activities during these later years become your primary focus, though they must be conducted with even greater subtlety than your healing work ever required. You're training not just individuals in specific techniques, but creating systems that will allow the knowledge to survive, even if the people carrying it don't, a form of cultural preservation that requires thinking generations ahead. This means developing ways to encode essential information into seemingly innocent activities, songs, stories, and traditions that can be passed down through families and communities without anyone realising they're preserving magical knowledge. The challenge is creating teaching methods so natural and unobtrusive that even the students don't fully understand what they're learning until they're mature enough to handle the responsibility safely. Sarah, now 28 and married to the Cooper's son, with 2 young children who show promising signs of sensitivity, has become your most accomplished student and your closest collaborator in this preservation work. Her education, which began years ago with what appeared to be normal instruction in women's work, has evolved into sophisticated training in healing, energy work, and the political skills necessary to practice safely in hostile environments. She demonstrates not only the technical abilities you've taught her, but the emotional intelligence and strategic thinking that make her capable of eventually taking over your role in the community. Watching her work with patients or navigate delicate social situations, you see not just competence, but wisdom that extends far beyond her years. Your method of training Sarah reflects lessons learned from decades of practice and observation about what actually works in real-world conditions versus theoretical ideals. Rather than simply passing on techniques, you teach can be trusted and which must be avoided, and how to recognise when it's safer to appear less knowledgeable than she actually is. These skills prove just as crucial as any herbal formula or energy technique. The preservation of your herb collection becomes a particular challenge during these years, requiring solutions that balance immediate practical needs with long-term survival strategies. You've spent decades accumulating seeds, cuttings, and specimens of plants with specific magical properties, many of which are rare or difficult to cultivate, some growing only in particular soil conditions or microclimates that exist in just a few hidden locations. Simply maintaining this collection requires constant attention, tracking planting cycles, protecting delicate specimens from weather and pests, and ensuring genetic diversity through careful breeding programs that would impress modern botanists. But ensuring its survival beyond your own lifetime requires training others to recognise, gather, and prepare these materials without understanding their true significance. You accomplish this by embedding the most important plants into the village's food and medicine traditions, so that future generations will continue to grow and use them for conventional purposes, while unknowingly preserving their magical potential. Your relationship with the younger generation of village women becomes increasingly important as you work to identify potential future practitioners while maintaining complete discretion about your selection criteria. Not every young woman has the abilities necessary for advanced work, but many can be taught basic protective techniques and folk remedies that will serve their families and communities, creating a broader base of knowledge that makes any individual practitioner less conspicuous. You begin incorporating elements of this teaching into the normal activities that bring women together. Spinning bees, where conversation flows as smoothly as thread. Harvest preparations that provide natural opportunities to discuss plant properties, and the informal gatherings where older women traditionally pass knowledge to younger ones through stories and practical demonstrations. The stories you tell during these gatherings serve multiple purposes, with layers of meaning that unfold gradually as listeners mature and develop the wisdom to understand deeper truths. On the surface, they're entertaining tales about local history, cautionary warnings about various dangers, and the kind of folk wisdom that any grandmother might share with younger family members. But embedded within these narratives are detailed instructions about protective practices, information about plant properties and their applications, and coded histories of the magical community that preserve essential knowledge while appearing to be nothing more than local folklore. A story about a woman who survived a harsh winter by knowing which berries to gather might actually contain precise information about emergency food sources and their preparation, while a tale about avoiding certain paths through the forest could encode warnings about dangerous plants or unsafe magical practices. Your practice during these later years shifts toward problems that require wisdom and experience rather than dramatic intervention, the kind of complex human difficulties that can't be solved with a single treatment, but need patient, sustained work over months or years. You specialise increasingly in the complex cases that younger healers can't handle, chronic conditions that require long-term treatment strategies, combining physical remedies with emotional and spiritual healing, family problems that involve multiple generations, and tangled webs of resentment and misunderstanding, and community issues that affect the social fabric of village life in ways that ripple outward to touch everyone. Your reputation for being able to help with these difficult situations grows carefully, spread through word-of-mouth recommendations that emphasise your practical wisdom and life experience rather than any unusual abilities. The marriage counselling you provide becomes particularly persistent arguments that affect children and extended family, or when marriages are failing in ways that threaten the economic and social stability of entire kinship networks, people begin finding their way to your cottage for advice about managing household harmony. Your interventions combine practical relationship guidance based on decades of observing human nature with subtle energy work that helps people release old resentments and find new ways to connect with each other, though clients experience this as simply feeling more hopeful and clear-headed after talking with you. Your work with the village's children during these years focuses on identifying and protecting those who show signs of unusual abilities, a delicate task that requires extreme caution since children are both more likely to display obvious magical talents and less capable of understanding why they must hide them. Most children with magical potential learn to suppress their gifts through social pressure and fear, unconsciously dampening abilities that make them feel different or attract unwanted attention from adults. But a few continue to demonstrate abilities that could attract dangerous attention if not properly managed. Children who seem to know things they shouldn't know, who have unusually strong effects on plants or animals, or who display healing gifts that exceed what could be explained by natural empathy. You develop ways to contact these children's families and provide guidance that helps the children learn to hide their abilities while preserving their potential for future development when they're mature enough to handle the responsibility. Your own relationship with Thomas during this decade deepens into something that transcends the practical partnership of your earlier years, evolving into a connection that feels almost telepathic in its understanding and mutual support. He's learned to read your moods and needs with an intuition that approaches the supernatural, though he'd probably attribute it to simple familiarity after decades of marriage. He provides emotional support for work that you can never fully explain to him, somehow understanding that your fatigue after certain cases goes beyond physical tiredness and requires different forms of restoration when you return from particularly difficult cases, especially those involving children or situations where you've had to watch people suffer, because helping them would expose too many others to danger. He knows to prepare the kind of simple meal that restores your energy, to bank the fire so you can sit quietly in the warmth, and to refrain from conversation until you're ready to rejoin the everyday world. The legacy projects you undertake during these years are designed to ensure that your knowledge survives, regardless of what happens to individual practitioners, creating redundant systems that make the loss of any single repository less catastrophic. You begin creating hidden repositories of information throughout the region, herb gardens disguised as decorative plantings around churches and manor houses, information encoded in the decorative patterns of household items that will be preserved and copied without anyone understanding their true significance, and knowledge preserved in the lyrics of songs that will be sung long after their original meanings are forgotten. These projects require years of careful work and coordination with other practitioners throughout the network, but they create multiple backup systems that make it likely some essential knowledge will survive, even if formal teaching networks are discovered and destroyed. Your final major healing work during this period involves the Lord's grandson, a boy of 12 who develops a wasting illness that the region's trained physicians cannot identify or treat, despite months of expensive consultations and increasingly desperate interventions. The case comes to you through the complex network of referrals that connects different social levels. A servant who remembers how you helped her sister, a minor noble who's heard whispers about your successes, and finally, the boy's desperate mother who's willing to try anything to save her child. It represents both an opportunity to provide crucial service to someone who desperately needs help, and a risk that could expose your entire community if anything goes wrong, since the case is being watched by everyone from local authorities to visiting physicians who want to understand what conventional medicine has missed. You ultimately succeed in diagnosing and treating a condition that involves both physical and spiritual components, a combination of nutritional deficiency, emotional trauma from witnessing violence during a local conflict, and what you privately recognise as interference from negative energies that have attached themselves to the boy's weakened system. The treatment requires months of careful work that must appear to be entirely conventional to the many observers watching the case. Dietary changes that happen to include plants with specific healing properties, activities designed to restore the boy's emotional balance that look like normal recreation and education, and protective work that appears to be nothing more than the kind of prayers and blessings any devout woman might offer. The boy's complete recovery cements your reputation as someone blessed with unusual wisdom, while revealing nothing about your actual methods. As you approach your 60th birthday, you begin to see the shape of your life's work more clearly, like stepping back from a tapestry you've been weaving for decades, and finally seeing the complete pattern. You've created not just a healing practice, but a system for preserving and transmitting knowledge that might otherwise be lost when social conditions make open practice impossible. You've trained practitioners who can continue serving their communities while maintaining the careful balance between effectiveness and safety that survival requires, and you've embedded their education so deeply in conventional activities that even they might not fully realise the extent of what they know. You've embedded protective practices and healing knowledge into the cultural fabric of your region in ways that will serve future generations, even if they never understand the true source of their traditions. The village now sees you as a respected elder, whose counsel is valued on everything from farming decisions to family disputes, a role that feels both deeply satisfying and somewhat amusing, given how hard you've worked to appear ordinary throughout your career. Your reputation for wisdom has become so well established that people seek your advice even on matters that have nothing to do with healing, though they don't realise that your insights often draw on decades of observing human nature through the lens of magical practice. You've achieved the remarkable feat of hiding your true abilities so successfully that your real work has become invisible, while building a conventional reputation that provides perfect cover for whatever future practitioners might need: rest and reflection. The years have taught you that true magic lies not in dramatic displays of power, but in the quiet work of healing, teaching, and preserving wisdom for those who will follow. Each lesson has been learned slowly, sometimes painfully, through decades of careful observation and gentle practice that left no trace except in the lives it touched. You've learned to find satisfaction in victories that no one will ever celebrate, in knowledge that must remain secret, like seeds buried in winter soil, and in service that can never be properly acknowledged, but whose effects ripple outward through generations like stones cast into still water. The deeper truth you've discovered is that the most powerful magic is the kind that appears to be no magic at all, the healing that seems like natural recovery, the protection that feels like good fortune, the guidance that arrives as timely coincidence. Your greatest achievements are the disasters that never happened because you prevented them, the illnesses that never developed because you caught them early, the conflicts that never escalated because you helped people find understanding. These invisible successes require no recognition because they create their own reward in the form of lives lived more fully, families that remain whole, and communities that thrive in ways they'll never fully understand. Your cottage in the evening hours has become silence that your work requires, sinking into the deep quiet that comes only when the day's responsibilities are complete. The familiar sounds of Thomas moving through his bedtime routine, the soft thud of boots being set aside, the gentle creak of floorboards as he checks the fire, the whispered prayer he thinks you don't hear, create a rhythm of domestic comfort that grounds you after days spent navigating the complex needs of your community. Thomas sleeps soundly beside you, his breathing deep and even, and the village around you settles into the quiet rhythms of night, unaware of how much your careful work has shaped their health, their safety, and their future. The physical space around you holds the accumulated energy of decades of healing work. The herbs hanging from your rafters carry the scent of generations of healing. Lavender that has soothed countless anxious minds. Sage that has cleansed both bodies and spirits. Rosemary that has strengthened memory and resolve. Each bundle represents not just dried plants, but preserved intentions, held energy, and the accumulated love of a woman who has spent her life serving others. The worn wooden table where you've prepared thousands of remedies bears the invisible patina of careful work, its surface smooth from years of grinding, mixing, and blessing. Even the stones of your hearth seem to hold warmth that goes beyond the physical heat of countless fires, as if they've absorbed something essential from the countless hours of focused intention that have unfolded in their presence. The knowledge you've preserved will continue to serve those who need it long after your own story is ended, embedded so deeply in the fabric of daily life that it has become invisible and therefore indestructible. In the songs that mothers sing to sick children, in the timing of planting and harvest that seems like simple tradition, in the herbal remedies that are passed down as family wisdom, your teachings live on without your name attached to them. This anonymity is not a loss, but the greatest possible success. Knowledge that survives because it has become part of the cultural DNA of your community. Sarah visits regularly now, bringing her children to learn what appear to be ordinary skills from their adopted grandmother. As you teach her daughter to recognise useful plants and her son to understand the moods of animals, you see the next generation already beginning to develop the sensitivity that may someday serve them and their community. The teaching continues naturally, woven into afternoon conversations and seasonal activities, invisible to outside observers, but creating a continuous chain of wisdom that stretches back to your grandmother and forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. The network of practitioners throughout the region continues its quiet work, now so well established and carefully concealed that it operates almost independently of any individual member. The systems you help create for communication, mutual protection, and knowledge preservation have become self-sustaining, adapting to changing conditions while maintaining their essential function. New practitioners emerge and are carefully trained, while older ones gradually step back into advisory roles, creating a natural cycle of renewal that ensures the work will continue regardless of what challenges the future may bring. Your relationship with the village has evolved into something that brings daily satisfaction without ever revealing its true foundation. People seek your advice on matters large and small, trusting your judgment because decades of experience have proven it reliable. Young mothers bring their children for blessing. Troubled families ask for guidance in resolving conflicts, and even the local authorities occasionally consult you about matters affecting community welfare. Your reputation for wisdom has become so well established that your influence extends far beyond what anyone realizes, shaping decisions and outcomes through suggestions that seem like common sense but carry the weight of magical insight. You've lived a life that required extraordinary courage disguised as ordinary virtue, profound knowledge hidden within apparent simplicity, and transformative power wielded through methods so subtle that their effects appear to be nothing more than good fortune and natural healing. Every day has demanded the performance of normalcy while practicing abilities that could have meant death if discovered. The constant vigilance, the careful words, the measured responses, all of it has become so natural that you sometimes forget the magnitude of what you've accomplished simply by surviving and thriving in a world that would have destroyed you if it had understood what you truly were. The world will remember you, if at all, as a village woman who was handy with herbs and blessed with an unusual run of luck in helping others. There will be no monuments to your achievements, no written records of your successes, no formal recognition of the lives you've saved or the knowledge you've preserved. But you know that you've accomplished something far more remarkable. You've kept the ancient knowledge alive in a hostile world, and you've passed it on to those who will carry it forward into whatever challenges the future may bring. The peace that settles over you now is not the peace of retirement, but the peace of work well done, of responsibility faithfully discharged, and of trust earned through decades of service. You have been a bridge between the old ways and the new world, carrying precious cargo across dangerous waters and delivering it safely to the other side. The knowledge lives on in capable hands. The healing continues through those you've trained, and the protection you've woven around your community will endure long after you're gone. Rest now, in the peace you've helped create, knowing that your quiet work has touched more lives than you can ever count. The herbs around you whisper their gratitude for hands that gathered them with such care, such wisdom, such love. Your breathing deepens as the day's tensions flow away like water finding its way to the sea. The village sleeps under protection. You helped weave, children